to the question and answer session following on from closing the reading webinar on the 1st of April. Thank you to everyone that joined and asked questions, and we hope that you took away some valuable information to help in your establishments. I'd like to say a big thank you to Stephen Tierney and Bernadette Kaye for spending the time today to answer the questions that were asked in that session. Okay, let's make a start. Morning, Stephen and Bernie.
Morning.
So we'll go straight to the questions. What specific interventions do you have in place to develop inference and comprehension skills? And that's for you, Bernie.
Yeah, so most of the interventions that we run at South Shore Academy are universal interventions. So we've trained all staff 2 full days of CPD on reciprocal reading strategies. So these are strategies where teachers explicitly model comprehension monitoring exercises such as asking questions, clarifying text, predicting, skimming and scanning, etc., etc. So this kind of intervention, it almost forms part of our quality first teaching package. So we expect all staff in all subject areas to be modelling reading comprehension within their classrooms. In terms of targeted interventions, we're currently investigating a number of more targeted interventions. We haven't quite made a decision yet, one of which is Ruth Miskin's Read, Write, Ink, but also something called DI, direct instruction, but we're very much at the investigating stage with these.
Okay, thank you, Bernie. And do you use coaching methods as part of the professional development you use with teachers outside English for vocabulary teaching, or reciprocal teaching methods?
Yeah, so we've just been part of a pilot scheme with Ambition Institute in terms of the early career framework, but very much the methodology we use with early career teachers is across the school. So it's that idea of setting powerful action steps as part of the coaching process with teachers, and definitely vocabulary reading instruction is always part of those powerful action steps, just as it is part of our quality first teaching framework. So that idea of setting small manageable targets that teachers can receive feedback on, and obviously have models in the school that can show just what excellent looks like in those fields. So yeah, we prioritise our early career teachers for that kind of approach, but it's certainly something we've done with all staff also.
Okay.
I'd just add into there, Darren, I think we're beginning to see practices like that happening across the Blackpool schools, academies and PRU. And in addition to what Bernie was talking about, sometimes we're seeing things like teachers getting alongside another teacher for literally 20 minutes just to work on one particular aspect of practice within the classroom as well. So trying to support what is the, if you like, the larger professional development opportunities delivered to staff, with getting alongside them in the classroom and supporting them there.
Okay. Next question was, what was stripped out from schools so that additional layers of support did not overwhelm staff and students? And have you got any examples of what was stopped?
Yeah, I think certainly we managed to appoint an additional member of staff to support in attendance, because that was certainly something that we expected form tutors to do, you know, make the second day absence phone calls and things like that, and certainly set targets for students with low attendance and monitor them. So we've taken attendance out of form tutor responsibilities, in addition to things like uniform monitoring and equipment monitoring, which is now done by pastoral staff on the door of our school. We make sure all students have the correct uniform, etc., and they don't get into the building without that. So that's something that form tutors no longer need to do, but obviously that does require huge pastoral support, which at the moment we have. I understand that that's not a luxury that every school has, but we knew that if we wanted reading to be done well, we had to strip some responsibilities from form tutors so that they could solely focus on that thing. I don't know if you've got any further examples, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'd speak at from a whole project level is, although this was Key Stage 3 literacy in terms of the if you like, the content of it, one of the roles that was, if you like, paid for by the project was an evidence-informed lead. And one of the things we had tried to do was fundamentally change the culture around school improvement. So if you're not careful, school improvement is the old kitchen sink stuff. Everybody's just lobbing as much as they can at it. And staff become disorientated and disenfranchised in some ways, and then they just get fed up with the lot, and it just disappears as a strategy. This was very much about trying to say, right, if we're going to work on Key Stage 3 literacy and reading because we think that is so important, that means that other things are going to not be done and stop. So in other words, we wouldn't bring in 5 or 6 or 7 different school improvement strands. And that took probably most of the first year. And by the end of the first year, we begin to see changes in schools where the school improvement focus was much, much tighter, clearer, far better implemented, monitored and evaluated, but fewer things being done at any one time. And I'll probably pick that up later in another question. But it's sometimes stopping doing things in terms of not introducing them all at once for staff.
Okay, thanks for that, Stephen. In terms of the literacy canon, did all students have the book in front of them and follow, or did the teacher read to the class, or was there a combination of both?
Initially, we have made sure that all year groups read the same book at the same time. Now, there have been huge financial backing towards that. We wouldn't have necessarily been able to afford that kind of an outlet hadn't it been for the Blackpool Opportunity Area support. Now, I think there's been a number of benefits from all students in the year group reading at the same time. We've been able to monitor and QA that kind of provision. Also, we've been able to do book launches as the terms have gone on. And we've been able to hold kind of set pace setting emails so that we can prompt form tutors that they should be up to a certain page by a certain time so that we can get through books at a similar kind of time. I know that some schools that I've been kind of chatting to recently haven't got that support, and I don't see why certain schools couldn't kind of have a set of books on rotation to minimise the financial outlay at the beginning. But at our school, we did a lot of training with staff in terms of the behaviours for learning in classrooms in form time. So we did initially insist that all students had a copy. Form tutors read to students and students followed along with a ruler. Just in terms of observations in and QAing the system, we have noticed that a lot of the students in the lower Stanines have kind of struggled to keep along, just in terms of the concentration and their ability to focus on text and print while somebody's reading to them has been quite strained. Actually, when I've done a bit of research into this, I've kind of come away from the fact that I want all students reading and tracking along. Yeah, I'd like the majority of students to do that, but for some students it's really quite difficult, and I'm happy for them to just be there and listening to the text, because I think there's a lot of merit in that. I think that's very much our context as a school and where we're at. And I know that other schools will find it a much easier undertaking, but we've come away from the idea of militantly policing all students reading and tracking. I think that's about it.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Bernie. Which year groups did you run the reading during registration?
Yeah, so this was initially a Key Stage 3 reading project, but actually we thought what was good for Key Stage 3 would be great for Key Stage 4. So we run it through 7 to 10. Year 11 do something slightly different in preparation for GCSEs and revision and things. So yeah, we read roughly a book a half term now, and we are extending form time going into September by 10 minutes. So we're moving from 20 minutes reading time up to 30 minutes. And we think that that's a decision we're going to make, because we've had such good response, and it's been a brilliant morning time routine. So we've done morning reading now for about a year and a half, and at this point we are confident that we can extend form time, and that would be a valuable addition to the school day.
Okay. How did you manage to free up form tutors? So who's now responsible for attendance, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, it's just really picking up some of the comments that Bernie's already made here. But if I talk about St Mary's, which was the school that went for the literary canon style of approach, then what actually happened is there was a 10-minute afternoon registration, which was literally register ticking by the time pupils have got there. What the school did is it restructured its whole school day, taking 10 minutes off 2 of the lessons. Now, St Mary's had 100-minute lessons, so it took 10 minutes off 2 of the lessons to create a 30-minute kind of reading time. And that reading time was across the whole school. So similar to Bernie, year 7 up to 10 were reading. We also had sixth formers with a couple of books that they would read as well. 11 and the 13 worked around different work, more suited towards examination preparation. But that meant that actually all that was expected was tick register and read with pupils. But it goes back to what Bernie was saying this morning. The morning registration was untouched, but in terms of the form tutor responsibilities, there's a much wider system around something like attendance, which involves pastoral managers doing first day responses. Heads of Learning House would be involved with people who had significant attendance issues, the PWO. So it's about focusing the time, and as I say, it was built into the structure of the day at St Mary's. So there weren't additional responsibilities as such that we needed to take off. Some of that work had already been done.
That's brilliant, thank you. What strategies did you use to engage students in this from the start? And what did you do to maintain interest in reading as the project moved forwards?
Yeah, so initially, this is something that concerned me slightly, but I thought that our students as year groups needed to know where they were at, and needed to know why we were changing our systems. So we actually shared the NGRT overview for year groups with our year groups so that they could see where they were in comparison to national. And obviously, I did a lot of work in assembly with them just to kind of deconstruct that and explain why that was significant, and the significance of reading ages in terms of attainment and things. So we at South Shore did book launches. So termly, when students are ready to move on to a new book, we as an SLT launch the book in assemblies, give a bit of the background knowledge, and a bit of kind of fancy introduction to each book. We also follow that with a bit of a social media campaign, and we send the blurbs of the books and some useful resources home to parents as well, just to introduce the new text. And also, as the term goes on, some of the books that we have chosen have been less successful in maintaining interest than others, and that's something I have been keen to evaluate as the months have gone on. It's certainly something I'm going to be working on this summer to refine and get the best of the books into different year groups. But as momentum has dipped, we have had things like SLT and year head takeovers where form tutors can drop their responsibility for the 20 minutes and a member of SLT will come in and pick up the book, and that's been really good for re-engaging students and making sure that actually students are very much aware that it is a whole school driver and the SLT are just as keen for this to work as others, and it's really important for everybody. Yeah, so I think that's about it. I think that there's definitely things that I want to work with our new librarian with in terms of increasing that engagement across the months. But yeah, that's everything.
Right, thank you, Bernie. How are you assessing students' reading and progress? Do you do a baseline assessment and then do it again? Which one do you use?
Yeah, so as part of the project in Blackpool, all schools baselined using the NGRT, and then we as a project assess the students at the end of the year. So we did it around September and then again around June. Actually, my school have used NGRT for non-routine admission students as well, and we found that really helpful in baselining them when they entered school. But also we're just moving into we get some wonderful data from the NGRT, but for the bottom students in Stanine 1 and 2, we wanted a little bit more of a kind of insight into what their difficulties were. So we've been just experimenting with the YARC assessment, which has been really helpful in just ascertaining the kind of more kind of subtle difficulties students are having. So we're very much in the infancy with that, but just the sample students that we've done it with, we found it, yes, it's a time-consuming exercise. It takes about 20 minutes per student, but it gives us some really meaningful data that we can act on in reading interventions.
And just kind of building on from that, alongside the GL new group reading test, all schools are also using, and these are all GL assessment tests, the PASS, which is a pupil attitude to school and self, and also the progress tests in English, maths and science. Because whilst we're assessing the reading, and that is, if you like, why the new group reading test is so key, we're also interested in, do we see any correlations as, say, we manage to improve pupils' reading ability with their attitudes to school and self and the different components with that? And is that also beginning to filter through into English, maths and science in terms of, is it beginning to filter through into those key curriculum areas? So the assessment, although it's quite focused within the project around what we're looking at, there are wider assessments that are being done to see if we can see any kind of correlations happening. And those actual GL assessments are really, really useful because they're actually used within the projects across Blackpool as well. So it's kind of, we use the suite of assessments and then they can be used in multiple projects depending upon what's the most appropriate measure based upon what you're actually looking at.
Okay. How do you break down the reading need for your cohort? So, for example, phonics, word knowledge, fluency.
Yeah, so the new group reading test just gives a breakdown once you've assessed students into passage comprehension and sentence completion. So we look at that data set initially, and like I said, we initially test students in Stanine 1 using the intervention that we run through Lexonic. We assess them for whether they would be needing a kind of phonics-based intervention or a decoding-based intervention. So that's initially what we've been looking at.
Question for you, Stephen. You mentioned staff having a fear of teaching literacy. How did you empower and support them to become teachers of literacy despite their reservations or lack of confidence?
I think there's different things around reservation, lack of confidence, and one of the things that I'd say is, as a general point, we tend to introduce this kind of initiative far too quickly and then move on from it far too quickly as well. So certainly in terms of the initial work which came out of St Mary's and then went to whole Blackpool, the staff at St Mary's had almost a 9-month lead-in, and that was important. And part of it was just doing simple things like we did a couple of books. So we just said to all staff across St Mary's, and it was actually the 2 primary schools that are part of the trust, does anybody want to get involved reading something called The Reading Mind, which is about Willingham? And the book's chosen deliberately because it starts to give you some underpinning knowledge around the processes that occur within the brain when we read. And what we found is that people just started to be fascinated with it, partly because they were moms and dads as well. So at this point, we're not making links necessarily into subjects that they were teaching, but they were fascinated by how children learn to read, because it's not something that many secondary staff have knowledge of. And to be honest, outside of kind of the Key Stage 1 early years, quite a few primary staff were saying, well, we never really got to hold of this stuff. So it's partly about piquing their interest. And then we moved on to the Alex Quigley book, Closing the Vocab book. And this is, as I say, in the January, February, March, April, before we actually implemented. So this big lead in, and people were beginning to be interested then. And then the other thing I'll kind of say leading on from that is, look at what I describe as near practice. What's something close to what staff are already doing that with tweaks can improve practice? So looking at something like tier 3 vocabulary, the kind of technical subject-based vocabulary is quite important, because there's certain words that if they're not taught within a subject, pupils are not going to encounter. And so staff at a subject level suddenly begin to see why literacy is so important to them. So it's things like when people are looking at photosynthesis, just breaking that down. Photo, where have we seen photo before? Photograph, well, it's the same idea. It's the light, and the synthesis being combining elements or production of chemical compounds. But as people start to look at it, you can start playing around with knowledge around some of the words. Quite often in science, where words end ASE, you're looking at an enzyme. Where if they end OSE, you're looking at sugars, and you've got poly in maths and science, your polymers and polygons, and what poly means. So you're beginning to move them into something that they're already very familiar with, but you're just getting them to be much more explicit. And a number of us went to watch a kind of a history lesson, which was great, and it's looking at Luftwaffe and air and war and Volkswagen as a people's car. And the staff very, very, almost intuitively begun to understand why the idea of literacy was so important to them. So that starts to actually break down the reservations, where they're beginning to look and think, oh, well, this is just obvious. I've got to get into teaching the words within my subject better. But then there are other things in terms of the kind of the fear of the unknown. And so when we were looking at, and as I say, in various academies now, you've got staff from a whole range of different subjects actually reading books with children. Now, some of the staff have kind of been saying, gosh, I haven't read a book since I was almost at school. They just weren't readers themselves. So going down that literary canon approach and all children reading the same book meant that we actually gave an honorarium, about £250 for people to go away, read a book. We produced a couple of different kind of knowledge organisers, one to support pupils and one to support teachers. And then they actually led the teachers for each book was encountered, and they went through key themes within the book, things to look out for, kind of vocabulary that would come across. And also these are the kind of questions, and the questions were given for people in terms of these are the things that you will come across. So you've got this massive commitment into at the time of professional development. And that's why I said, remember early on about this idea of doing fewer things. The problem is we try and do too many things and we do them badly because there just isn't sufficient time. This has been a real commitment across those Blackpool schools, and you've got to commit significant time to support staff, getting alongside them in class if they're struggling. And so I think it's trying to see it about kind of, there's emotional issues that you have to deal with as well as the kind of rational issues. So how do I teach reading is not the same as kind of, I feel fearful because I don't know enough. And also the things that actually changed the way we operate to support them. So there's a lot in there around building staff up, but doing it over time. And dealing with both the knowledge needs they have and kind of those emotional supports, because nobody wants to look daft in front of the class.
That's great, thank you. How do you ensure sustained momentum over time?
Well, part of this is just fundamentally built into the plan. So it wasn't we were going to do everything on day one. And it's about kind of those bite-sized chunks that people can take. So early work might be around vocabulary and developing tier 3 vocabulary, then tier 2, and then it would be looking in more detail at how we're going to introduce a greater amount of reading amongst the pupil population. And then it's looking in, and we'll be talking shortly about the kind of the Stanine 1 and 2, those kind of lower attaining students. But critically, the professional development of staff. And where this is important is that because we've built in a structure around the project, which has the project leads in every single schools who come together, support each other, look at all the stages of developing, and then that's going back into schools. You have somebody who's leading it in a very sustainable way, and just kind of going back, whether it might be termly or half termly, doing some tweaks, maybe annually there's a big addition into the project, of this is the next phase that we're now looking at. So it's trying to look at it in that very sensible, planned way, as opposed to trying to hit it at 100 miles an hour and everybody becoming exhausted and falling over because there's just too much for them. It really is about planning it out.
Okay. You saw an increase in female students in the bottom ninth, whilst you saw a decrease in males. What do you take from this in terms of your project, and do you see a long-term implication for equality that requires tweaking the delivery?
Just so people are aware, these were two graphs alongside each other. They were a year 7 group, and you saw an increase in pupils in the first Stanine, which was towards the left-hand side of the graph. If you actually break that down, the reduction in boys was equivalent to 1 pupil. The increase in girls was 3 pupils, and that's in a year group of 200. But if I'd put the year 8 graph on, you would have shown actually increases in both boys and girls, but much greater increase in the boys in terms of moving into the lower Stanine. And so what you have to do here is just be careful of looking at individual data points, particularly when we're talking about 1 or 2 children. So what we're not seeing is a significant gender issue. The data we're getting back from GL is actually girls are slightly higher, but it's only 1 point or 2 points above the boys, which is quite interesting because at GCSE, the gap between girls and boys is massive, with boys significantly underperforming girls across Blackpool. So the first thing I'd look at is I think we need to move out of gender with this particular issue, because what we actually saw is more to do with whether this project was suited to addressing the needs of lower attaining pupils. And the answer is no. What has actually happened is for pupils in the middle, lower middle and upper, there have been some substantial increases that we've seen across a number of schools. But what we've also seen across the whole project, and this is across numerous schools, numerous year groups, is for those pupils in the lowest Stanines, Stanines 1 and 2, they've tended to almost get further behind. And that kind of has led to some specific work around what we call the Stanine 1 and 2 issue. And so when we start to dig into this, because we're talking about relatively low numbers of pupils, it varies from one school to the next, we can put names on the pupils. Now, there's 1 or 2 who the schools are just saying, well, they shouldn't be in there. You know, they've just not, if you like, bothered doing the test properly. There's a few there. But one of the things that was significant amongst a lot of the pupils is SEND became a key factor. And one of the things that we were seeing is possibly there weren't EHCPs in place where there should have been, and also whether the EHCPs that were in place were sufficiently focused around literacy and quite often speech, language and communication. And the other thing that it actually exposed is that there had been some pupils who were quietly going along unnoticed, who had significant need, which had previously not been uncovered or met. So what that had started to do is it started to expose for us, if you like, another significant project that we needed to look at.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. In the graph that showed a shift in the reading levels, did the very low group shift also?
That's the group that I've just been talking about, and the answer is no, they did not. And so that's why we're looking and we're beginning to put together a project which is saying, right, these kind of interventions that we have in place, which seem to be working really effectively, where we, if you like, where they've been implemented well across a number of schools, and I'll talk about that data shortly. It's not meeting the needs of those pupils in Stanine 1 or 2, the lowest Stanines. And so something's different is needed. And it's much more individualistic, and it's around meeting possibly special educational needs they have. And there is a unifying theme across a number of them, which is around about speech, language, and communication. So their phonological skills aren't strong enough. And that's a different issue.
Okay. Can you say something about the outcomes achieved across all schools involved in the project?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm kind of sat looking at some of the data across all schools. One school interests me particularly, and it's a school where the standard age score has gone down quite significantly. And the reason that it interests me, and I'm going to be clear here, I'm moving from science to supposition, is because I know the school and I know the problems that they had getting a lead, which they didn't have in place in the year, not being able to attend all the CPD, and then obviously being able to implement very little. It's almost in my head acting as a little bit of a control. And what we saw in that school is the average standard age score went down by 5. And why that interests me is it would start to kind of sit with that general information we have that over time, disadvantaged pupils, of which there are many, many in Blackpool schools, move further apart in terms of their attainment and progress from their more affluent peers. So that potentially provides a baseline. And what we then saw is 3 schools where they, if you like, the progress being made by those children was as expected nationally. And that's not what's happening at Progress 8. So we now have 3 schools where we're wondering whether actually they're beginning to make the progress that you would expect. And that is putting something significantly in place. Are they beginning to work in those pupils being able to hold their own, despite what might be massive socioeconomic issues? And then there's half the schools where there are some quite significant improvements, including one which is the pupil referral unit, the PRU. And those improvements are, and this is across, so this is an average for all the pupils. And so we could be talking across these kind of schools of the best part of about 1,000 pupils, where we're seeing improvements of 5 standard age points, 5 standard age points 4 and 3. And those are really quite interesting. And so what we would kind of have is what I describe as early promise across what is quite a significant, what's a big project.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Over to Bernie now. Do you use any structured phonics with Stanine 1 and 2 students?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think initially my ignorance told me at the beginning of the project that actually Stanine 1 and students, they've all got a phonics issue. And I think that really is a kind of a conclusion you might jump to with very little training in this kind of field. So Stephen alluded to the CPD that I've had as a lead as part of this project, and certainly the CPD as I've gone along has taught me a lot more about these kinds of misconceptions. So when you actually look at the Stanine 1 and 2 students, their data is one thing, but actually when you complete a YARC assessment with them alongside the new group reading test, you can see that Actually, phonics isn't the issue, and that it's more of a reading comprehension, a decoding issue that students have got. So to just assume that all Stanine 1 and 2 students need phonics is a poor assumption, and that I certainly made the mistake of. But yeah, we do have a structured phonics programme for students that require that intervention. We use Lexonic Leap, which is a kind of 4-to-1 intervention, and it's roughly 20 minutes a day, and basically it assesses which phonics students are having difficulty with, so that the gaps can be plugged within that intervention. And we've seen that works really well with students that need it. So you've got to be really kind of diagnostic with which students you make sure that receive that intervention. It's worked particularly well with EAL students, particularly those with no background phonological awareness. We've had a cohort of students that haven't had formalised education in their own language, and it's worked really well with those students, building them up from almost ground zero. And that's everything.
Great. And did you use drop everything and read time at all in the project?
I've worked in schools where drop everything and read has worked really well. I've worked in schools where reading ages are much more advanced, and that students, given the opportunity to read for 20 minutes a day, their own chosen book, it's worked really well. I was very clear that I didn't think that it would work at my school, given the reading age scores. I didn't think that students had A, the motivation, or B, the ability to be able to read on their own for extended periods. So I was very clear that I wanted form tutors to lead on the reading time. So we don't do any additional independent reading at the moment. It is all mainly guided by form tutors, but as I talked about in the web conference, we have just opened a library, and independent reading is definitely something that we are going to be working on in the future.
I'd just say, I think one of the challenges of the drop everything and read, which can quite often operate differently in different schools, but it would be kind of like, bell would go at 12 o'clock, you'd stop whatever you're doing and read for 20 minutes, is there's a real problem with teacher compliance across the piece. And that's partly because if you're in the middle, I don't know, of a scientific experiment or reading a text or doing an exercise, it's really difficult to drop everything and read. And so it's kind of got very mixed feedback when they've tried to look at it across the piece. And largely it's around teacher compliance, I think.
Okay, thank you. In terms of parents, how did you involve and encourage them to support their child's reading?
Yeah, so we straight away, as soon as we completed the package of GL assessments, the new group reading age generated is something that we reported on with the annual parental report. So we sent reading ages home at the beginning of the year, and we also sent them home at the end of the year with the gains made, so that the parents could see the journey students have been on. So that was one thing, and also we've mainly targeted the students in terms of trying to generate parental support through the students. So because we've put such an emphasis on reading with students in assemblies and in form and things like that, it's tended to get back to the parents. And that's been the main thing for us. We've also, at the beginning of the year, the reading curriculum that we've created at South Shore has been sent home to parents, so parents knew exactly which books the students would be reading as part of the Register and Read programme, but also as part of the English curriculum as well.
Thank you, Bernie. Stephen, could you describe the collaboration with local primaries and effective transition from year 6 to year 7?
The question is an interesting one, and it also looks at the parent one. So this project was set up as a very clearly Key Stage 3 project. So that was the focus. And one of the things I often see in school improvement attempts is that you have this massive, complex project set up across so many different pieces instead of something sharply focused. And it's the issue of complexity and what described as by those people as wicked problems, looking for perfect solutions, where you try and get every single different dimension in and really fall into abeyance. So within this project, which was 8 to 9 schools, all Key Stage 3, of £1 million, involving hundreds of staff, thousands of pupils, we felt that was enough, particularly when we were working across multiple strands of vocabulary. You're looking at reading time for pupils, you're looking at professional development. At the minute, the transition, which I could talk about, sits outside the project, and it varies at schools. So the trust that I led was an all-through trust, both primary and secondary. And so there was massive work done across the trust, and some of the work that was done in Key Stage 3 was replicated, but with context around primary. So there was a literary canon for the primary, which made sure there was a variety of reading, but the issues for the teachers were different, because many of them were used to teaching literacy because it's something that they would do day in, day out as part of their normal practice. And often what they were looking for was where text was subject specific and support with that. And so there was a lot of really quite detailed curriculum work between the schools, but that sits outside the project. And I suppose I would just look and I'd say one of the things that I think we need to get better at is looking at projects which are complicated. They have a number of different elements, but they don't move into such a complexity that you can't take forward a school improvement plan and learn from it. And if you like, you're trying to run way before you can walk or even crawl. So the transition, an effective transition, I can talk about it in those ways, but it wasn't part of the Key Stage 3 project. That was deliberately contained within those 3-year groups.
That's great. Thank you, Stephen. I've got a question now on vocabulary instruction. The Freya model is a great approach for preloading vocabulary. How do you tackle unfamiliar vocabulary during reading that was not predicted?
Yeah, great question. And obviously it really relies on responsive teaching and having confident teachers that can almost respond to the needs of the students as it goes along. You can't always predict everything that students are going to struggle with. A wonderful example of this is a colleague of mine spent a whole lesson talking about what an anorak was, because it came up in a text and the students really didn't have a clue what an anorak was, and it kind of led to a bit of a detour. I think research tells us that vocab should entail active engagement. So, when the students are trying to clarify words for themselves and are questioning pieces of text for themselves, they're on their way to kind of monitoring their own comprehension. So that's really good. That's where we want students to be, questioning vocabulary. But I think importantly, you need to offer opportunities for deep processing so that the students really think about the word so that they stick. I think I've read a number of pieces of research, and anything between 10 and 17 exposures to a word make the words stick. So, just telling them what the word means as they come along is great. But, following it with lots of opportunities to, see the word as a picture, choral repetition is a really good technique also. And giving opportunities for students to really dig deeper, look at prefixes and suffixes and root words, as Stephen alluded to earlier. That's going to give that opportunity for deep processing so that students really pick that vocabulary up and it transcends into their long-term memory.
That's great. Thanks very much, Bernie. Okay, well, I'd just like to thank Stephen and Bernie for your insights into this fantastic project and how it's helping to reduce the reading gap in Blackpool, and taking their time out today to answer all those questions from the original webinar. So thank you very much again, Bernie and Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
On the screen now, you'll just see some web links to our future seminars that we're doing through the summer term. They're also on our website, so please feel free to register for those over the coming weeks. And we look forward to seeing you shortly on our next webinar. Thank you very much.